Our next speaker is the founder and editor of Caffeinated Thoughts. He's also co-host of Caffeinated Thoughts Radio that can be heard weekly on KTIA 99.3 FM and also can be heard through podcast. He founded 415 Communications LLC, a social media and communications consulting and management firm which has worked with clients such as American Principles Project, Iowa Right to Life, and the Republican Party of Iowa. He's a nationally recognized expert on the Common Core state standards and their impact on education policy. He writes on the subject extensively at Truth in American Education. He's also been recognized by Campaigns and Elections magazine as one of the top political influencers in Iowa. His work has also been published at Fox News, Politico, and The Hill. And, by the way, Caffeinated Thoughts is one of the most widely read political blogs in the state of Iowa. Prior to all this, he spent 20 years in youth ministry serving in church, parachurch, and school settings, including 10 years working with juvenile offenders and high-risk youth in Des Moines. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my good friend and the Charlie Cook of Iowa politics, Shane Vander.
I got one poll right and said I'm Charlie Cook. So, hey Mo, go ahead and forward to the video. I just want to play a video that's, I think, a common scene around households this year.
Okay. What's wrong? Sophia, come on, we gotta do this, baby. Sophia.
I hate this school and I hate Common Core. Don't want to do my homework.
Come on, we're gonna figure this out. It's just gonna take us some time, but we can do this. Come on. We have just a few more left.
Yeah, it's gonna take me forever to do.
Well, it's gonna take it. We'll do it together forever. So come on.
Cause one math problem, it takes me at least 2 hours to figure it out. Because I still have to do all this. I still have to write everything under here.
What do you mean you have to write everything?
I have to write all. I have to do like this. I have to do like all this. I have to do that, but it has to go with these math problems, and I don't get any of this math homework. Give me spelling. Give me something that's easier.
Please give me spelling. I would have cried that too when I was in elementary school. As my dad's here, he would attest. My mom, that math was not my favorite subject, to say the least. But I couldn't even imagine doing it under Common Core. Not only kids are not only expected to get the right answer, they're also required to explain how they got there. But you may have heard. Go ahead before the next slide. Here's some common phrases we hear a lot from Common Core advocates. This was a state-led initiative. These are just standards, not curriculum. Data is not being collected and shared. The standards are benchmarked to international standards so our students can compete in a global economy. We are a mobile society and standards will allow children to easily move from state to state. I want to look at some of those phrases. I'm going to kind of knock them down one by one. But first of all, I want to explain what is Common Core. Who knew Common Core was adopted by 46 states in 2010? Who knew when Iowa did it? Okay, Dr. Bob did. That's it. Most of us did. I'll just kind of give you a rundown. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers together formed an initiative called the Common Core State Standards Initiative. They hired a company, a DC-based company called Achieve Incorporated, to develop a set of academic standards in math and English language arts that was going to be in common with all states. In Iowa, when the State Board of Education adopted the Common Core State Standards on July 29, 2010, replaced our previous math and English language arts standards. Go ahead, next slide. So that's the next question. You got a forward move. Next slide. you. Keep up. What is the Common Core? There are a lot of people who are confused by what is Common Core, what is the Iowa Core. I even had legislators ask me that question who were on the Education Committee. They were confused. The Iowa Core was first developed in 2005 when the Iowa legislature passed SF 245, which set voluntary standards for high school students in literacy, math, and science. Then the Iowa Core was made mandatory for public and accredited non-public schools, expanded to kindergarten through 8th grade, and they also added social studies and 21st century learning skills in 2008 when they passed SF 588. That was under Governor Chet Culver. They gave the State Board of Education authority, and this is where the Common Core came in, and how they were able to do this kind of under the radar. They gave the State Board of Education authority to align standards with any nationally or internationally recognized standards. I hear a lot. Go ahead, next slide. Oh, okay. You're getting ahead. You know what? Forget the slides. Just standards. We hear a lot about just standards. Well, every state that adopted the Common Core state standards and assessments did so in conjunction with these 4 assurances. Consistent across stimulus-funded programs with waivers or a waiver administered by the Department of Education. We had, states were expected to identify and improve low-performing schools. They were expected to adopt college and career-ready standards. They were expected to develop a pre-K to college and career data system, and they were also expected to address improving teacher effectiveness. And this came in the form of state fiscal stabilization funds, race at top applications, no child left behind flexibility waivers. And speaking to UNESCO in 2010, Secretary Arnie Duncan called these combined reforms his cradle-to-career education agenda, and he characterized it as a quiet revolution in school reform. And he also asserts that the administration had sought to fundamentally shift the federal role in education. But we're told these are just standards. Bill Gates, who was a large funder of developing the Common Core, said, when the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well, and that will unleash powerful market forces in the service of better teaching. And for the first time, there will be a large base of customers eager to buy products that help every kid learn and every teacher get better. Imagine having people who create electrifying video games, applying their intelligence to online tools that pull kids in and make algebra fun. Now, I'm all for making algebra fun. But again, I want to reemphasize, this is more than just standards. Bill Gates also said, it would be great if our education stuff worked, but we probably won't know for a decade. Think about that. He's pouring millions of dollars into creating the Common Core state standards. 46 states adopted these. They were never field tested. But hey, trust us, this is going to be the silver bullet in education reform. Kids are going to be prepared for STEM. They're going to be ready for college. They're going to be ready for the workforce for the 21st century global economy. Okay? Trust us. We haven't field tested it. We don't really know. But we really won't know for a decade. So our kids are going to be a guinea pig, or guinea pigs in these classrooms for a decade. Then we'll know if this is going to be a success or a failure. We hear a lot too, the Common Core is state-led. I hear that all the time. The governors wrote them. The governors developed the standards. No, they did not. Common Core is not state-led, it's special interest-led. Stating these standards were state-led implies a legislative grant of authority, but unfortunately our legislature, and I don't know why they thought this was a good idea, gave authority to our State Board of Education to change our standards on a whim. We, the people, were left out of the process. National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers, those are official sounding names, but they are not governmental entities. They do not represent you or I. They also lack transparency. One person in 2010, Dr. Bob, knew the Common Core was adopted in Iowa. before last school year, Gallup and Phi Delta Kappa showed that only 1 in 3 Americans knew anything about Common Core, and at the time, only 45% of public school parents knew anything about the standards. That was right as they were starting to be implemented in most states. New York was a little bit further ahead of the curve than everybody else. And if this was such a transparent process, why did more people not, why don't people know about it? Why do they not have an idea what it is? A UConn poll done in May of 2014, said 61% of Americans who knew a great deal about Common Core viewed it negatively. So it seems like the more you learn about Common Core, the less you like it. We're also told there's going to be no loss of control. States control their standards. However, these standards are licensed and copyrighted by the National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers. They own them. States can only add up to 15%. Now, I wouldn't say being in control of only 15% of your standards as saying that I'm retaining, that's retaining our state sovereignty in education. You're ceding away 85% of the standards. You can't rewrite them, you can't reorder them, you can't replace them. You have to take them all or nothing. Common Core is not state-led, it's federally coerced. I want to be very careful. These are not federal standards. The U.S. Department of Education did not write the standards. However, we would not have seen them adopted in 46 states had they not been involved. Through the Race to the Top, through No Child Left Behind waivers, they even considered taking away Title I money. Fortunately, they got slapped down and they realized that wasn't going to be a good idea. They tried the carrot and stick approach. When California considered suspending assessments until they could successfully implement the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia, they were threatened with a suspension of funds. Again, oh, wait a minute, states are in control? No, not as far as the U.S. Department of Education is concerned. Remember, they wanted to radically shift the federal role in education. Oklahoma received a flexibility waiver for No Child Left Behind, but they had recently repealed the Common Core state standards. And oh, guess what? Arnie Duncan, he took away their waiver. But hey, states are in complete control. They can choose any standards they want, right? The NGA, Council of Chief State School Officers, Achieve, in benchmarking for success, actually encouraged federal funding for the priorities they listed. And out of this came the idea for Race to Top, and as well as the No Child Left Behind waiver. So when you hear a governor, even our own governor, even though he wasn't in office at the time, state, we didn't want the feds involved. Well, the National Governors Association actually asked the federal government to get involved and fund this thing. So we cannot let our governors off the hook here when they say that, especially if they were in office at the time. They knew full well what they were asking. Common Core is not state-led, it's Bill Gates-led. In total, 4 organizations primarily responsible for Common Core State Standards Initiative, the NGA, CCSSO, Achieve, as well as Student Achievement Partners, have taken $147.9 million from Bill Gates. Overall, the Gates Foundation has spent an estimated $173.5 million in advancing the Common Core. Joy Pullman of the Heartland Institute said almost actually $243 million has been spent on Common Core and related advocacy. Wouldn't it be great to be able to buy education policy? So really one man, one foundation is the driving force. They got the U.S. Department of Education involved. You have DC state trade groups, DC-based trade groups, pushing this agenda on us. This is not state-led. If this was state-led, we would have had a public debate, we would have had a vote in our state legislature, and we would be aware of this. Common Core is also unconstitutional and illegal. I won't spend a lot of time here because I'm trying to cram a 45-minute presentation into 25 minutes or so. The Constitution is pretty simple. You read through Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, you do not see education listed as an enumerated power of Congress. It's not in there. You don't see it under the executive branch. It certainly isn't under the judicial branch. And the 10th Amendment is pretty clear that that power is not given to the federal government, it's reserved for the states and for the people. People tend to forget, the education bureaucracy tends to forget that somehow, some way, we educated people before 1976. We sent men to the moon before there was the U.S. Department of Education. But there's this trend of wanting to centralize education, not only at the state level, but the federal level. And our education system is in decline. The more centralization we see, the further the decline. We need more local control. Not only do you have a constitutional argument as well, there are 3 federal laws that speak against a federal involvement in education. You have the General Education Provision Act, you have the Elementary and Secondary Act of Education Act of 1965. You have also the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, that's the stimulus bill, and you're probably wondering, what does that have to say about education? The General Education Provision Act states specifically that the U.S. Department of Education, or the federal government, is not to administer a national test. But yet we have 2 assessment consortia, PARC and Smarter Balance, Iowa's advisory state for Smarter Balance, that receive basically I'd say about 96% of all their funding from the U.S. Department of Education. These are Common Core aligned tests. Now, they might say, well, we're not developing the test. No, but you're paying for it, and you are making it a requirement if the state wants to be competitive for Race to the Top or receive a waiver that they need to join one of these assessment consortia. You may not be violating the letter of the law, but you're certainly violating the spirit of the law. So there shouldn't be any federal involvement. There shouldn't be a national test, but by de facto, you do have national tests with Smarter Balance and PARC being federally funded and pushed on states. The stimulus bill, also, where the Race to the Top fund money came from, and that was a $4.35 billion executive earmark in the stimulus package. Congress stipulated in that bill just 4 general different types of reforms, encouraging states to adopt college and career-ready standards, strengthen their standards. But the Department of Education went beyond what Congress stipulated and specified in the grants evaluators, in their applications, or their guidance, stated that states that join a consortium that included a majority of states will be awarded high points in their application. If they didn't join a consortium of majority states, they got lower points, and that would pretty much take you out of competition. The only consortia at the time was the Common Core State Standards. They were the only game in town, so they were pushing this. And this went beyond what Congress intended. Common Core also, I've stated in the past that even if it weren't for the federal involvement, even if it weren't for the unconstitutionality, I'd be concerned about the Common Core because I believe it's dataless reform. They claim international benchmarking all the time, but that's a myth. No information was presented to the validation committee to show how the Common Core stacked up against standards of other high-achieving countries. In fact, the Common Core establishment no longer claims the standards are internationally benchmarked. The website, I haven't checked recently, but the website might not state this, but even just a few months ago, it just stated they are informed by standards of other countries, and there's no definition of what informed by means. That was Dr. Sandra Stotsky who pointed that out, and she was involved in the validation committee, and she's like, they didn't give us that information, but yet they like to claim that. Also, what evidence? Again, these are standards that were rolled out in 46 states, classrooms across the country. No field testing was done. But they're saying, hey, this is evidence-based, but frankly, only 2 documents have been cited as far as their evidence is concerned. Myths and Facts and the Joint International Benchmarking Report, both citing evidence from one report, which is the Benchmarking for Success Report, which, by the way, was published by the National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers, hardly independent research. In this benchmarking report, if you read through it, it has over 135 endnotes and many are repetitive references. Only 4 of the cited evidences can be considered empirical studies related to the topic of national standards in student achievement. 4. But yet this is supposed to be evidence-based. There simply isn't any data that suggests that centralizing education around a set of common standards will raise student achievement, period. But yet this is the silver bullet we've been given in education reform. Trust us, it'll work. Common Core actually ignores evidence-based reform. It ignores the lesson of Massachusetts, which passed in the early 90s, content-based standards, content-based exams for high school seniors, as well as for teachers. Go figure. Teachers actually had to pass the exam before they could teach to prove they knew the material they were supposed to be teaching. What a radical concept, right? Also, they included more local control in their bill, not less. And at the time, Massachusetts was in the middle of the pack. In the 80s, they were in the middle of the pack for K-12 education. And they became national leaders in K-12 education. But you know what? Common Core does not follow a single lesson learned by in the Massachusetts reform that we saw. Also, in 2010, William McCollum, who was the lead writer for the Common Core math standards, said the overall standards would not be too high. Think about that. These are supposed to be rigorous standards, but they wouldn't be too high, certainly not in comparison to other nations, including East Asia, where math education excels. Think about that for a second. Isn't the whole point of us introducing these common standards to help increase student achievement in math and help us to be better compete with some of these nations kicking our butt in math, right? But here he's saying it won't do that. This is a guy who actually wrote the standards. Also, another thing that's ignored is the Common Core, as a course, delays Algebra 1 to 9th grade, something that leading nations in math don't do. Massachusetts didn't do it either. Then also you have Common Core's big data dig. This reform encourages data mining. The Department of Education stipulated in the Race to the Top requirement that states had to set up a database, and they gave money for states to do that, out of the generosity, out of the goodness of their hearts. They gave Iowa $12 million to set up a statewide longitudinal database system. Surely they don't expect anything in return for that, right? They also listed a couple different websites, one of which we learned has actually been taken down recently. Go figure. But they list 400 different data points that can be collected on students. Now, are those being collected right now? Probably not. But it begs the question, why are you listing this? Why are you pushing this agenda if you don't intend for states and school districts to eventually provide this type of data? Iowa had signed a memorandum of understanding with Smarter Balanced, and then things are changing with Smarter Balanced. I'll get that for a second. Smarter Balanced has a contract with the U.S. Department of Education where they are required to give up student-level data. Now, since No Child Left Behind was passed, we've always had some data sharing with the federal government, but it's always been at the aggregate level, not at the student-level data level. It's always been how are schools doing as a whole, how are states doing as a whole. But it's concerning, and I've had several discussions with Iowa Department of Education officials. It's like, look, I'm not making this up. You have the contracts right here. It says it point blank. We have this relationship with Smarter Balance, and Smarter Balance is supposed to give up make student level data available. To whom? Why? What student level data? Well, we don't know for sure. So I don't want to earn the tinfoil hat award here, but I see an agenda present that's linked to Common Core, and we have.
Iowa has recently pulled out of Smarter Balance. At least they have not signed the new memorandum of understanding with the because it's shifting from the Smarter Balance group to UCLA, and they have not signed the new one. But we still may end up with the Smarter Balanced assessment. And again, the question still exists: what data will be collected from students as a result of that assessment if Iowa does that? Common Core, I believe, also represents these are subpar standards. And I agree, we need high standards, as Dr. Bob talked about. But let's actually bring in high standards. Common Core is not it. Common Core puts an undue emphasis on informational text. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, she again was on the validation committee for the Common Core English standards, said an English curriculum overloaded with advocacy journalism or with informational articles chosen for their topical and or political nature should raise serious concerns among parents, school leaders, and policymakers. Dr. Terrence Moore of Hillsdale College, actually he's at a charter school now down in Atlanta. He wrote a book called Story Killers. I highly encourage you to read it. He said, the unstated but nonetheless unmistakable intent of the Common Core is to erase any remnant of traditional learning in English classes of our public schools. As such, the architects of the Common Core are nothing short of story killers. And within the Common Core standards, you see an emphasis on informational text. And as a kid progresses through school, initially it's a 50-50 split. By the time a youth is a senior, 70% of the reading that they do is supposed to be informational text, not literature. And that's for classes across the board, not just literature classes. But what we're finding with a lot of the curriculum offerings being out there is that kids, schools are taking kids less and less through whole books. Instead, it's more excerpts of literature. And it's putting a greater emphasis on informational text, which is more opinion-based, which could end up having more advocacy, more. The standards themselves don't have indoctrination because they're just English and math standards. But with schools purchasing new curriculum, this is where we can see indoctrination take place. As they purchase new books, and it seems like publishers are increasingly going more and more and more leftward. So we're concerned about that. Also, one example that's from local, maternity testing in 6th grade literature class. Baxter Schools required their 6th grade literature class, okay? I want to emphasize, literature class, not a science class, had kids read Advances in Genetics. That said, in part, in the past there was no way to be sure of who a child's biological father was. Rumors could never be proved or disproved. Mothers who couldn't prove who the fathers were, they had no legal grounds to get child support. Today, a simple DNA test can match any child with any parent. Then it brings up Thomas Jefferson. The most famous maternity case involves President Thomas Jefferson. For centuries, there were rumors that Jefferson was the father of the children of his slave, Sally Hemings. Then it goes on to state that the DNA testing does confirm the father was from his family or perhaps the former president himself. Would this be appropriate discussion in a high school science class? Sure. But in 6th grade literature class? Sure. I don't think so. Also, there's a fatal flaw in the Common Core ELA standards. Dr. Sandra Stotsky says, its arbitrary division of reading standards into 2 groups, 10 standards for informational text and 9 standards for literature, at all grade levels from K to 12. Based on these numbers, school administrators were told English teachers to reduce literary study to less than 50% of reading instructional time. And their interpretation of this 50-50 division in ELA reading standards has not been contradicted by the chief architect of the Common Core's literature standards, now head of the College Board, who's managed to confuse everyone by insisting the literature remains the focus of the English class. Because one of the primary problems with these standards in the English language arts section is that they're not clear. Also with math does not prepare for STEM. At the 2010 meeting of Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, Professor Jason Zimba, who's another one of the lead writers of the Common Core Math Standards, said that colleges most kids go to, the Common Core prepare, but not the ones most parents aspire to. He also added these standards were not for selective colleges. So if your kid wants to go to Ivy League school, or UC Berkeley, or Stanford, or whatnot, they won't be prepared. Also, going beyond that,
They don't even really prepare kids for a STEM program in any college. Because in another interview, Zimba stated that if a student wanted to take calculus as a freshman, as a college freshman, and again, me not enjoying math, I don't know why anyone would want to do that, but some kids actually do want to do that. They would need more math than what the Common Core requires. Because basically, the Common Core is set up to take a kid through Algebra 2, which is what I ended up doing. And guess what I'm doing for a living? I'm not in a STEM field by any stretch of the imagination. I blog and Facebook and tweet for a living. I just came out of my basement for this conference. At least I can say I own my basement. It's not my parents' basement. So, if we want kids, if we really want to prepare kids for STEM, shouldn't we have better math standards? But there's nothing in the Common Core for pre-calc, for trigonometry. It will not get kids prepared. Now, if kids get there, and schools get kids there, and there will be some that do that, they're doing that in spite of Common Core, not because of Common Core. Here's some examples of these are just some homework examples we've seen, that we see a lot of Common Core math textbooks require. Instead of stacking, they're having to do the lattice method. Go ahead, next slide. Kids are encouraged to explain how they got to the answer. He says, I got this one young man who was very brilliant, says, I got the answer by talking to my brain, and I agreed with the answer that my brain got. I agree too. Then explain how your answer. Math. Brilliant kid, give him an A. And then also, these standards are developmentally inappropriate. Dr. Megan Koshnick, she's a child psychologist, says, why do we care if Common Core standards are age inappropriate? Well, you can answer that with one word, stress. Instead of thinking about what's developmentally appropriate for kindergartners, they're thinking college to where we want this kindergartner to end up. So let's backtrack down to kindergarten and have kindergartners work on these skills from an early age. This can cause major stress for the child because they're not prepared for this level of education. If you read through the kindergarten standards, for instance, I mean, we're talking promoting algebraic thinking with kindergartners. Think about that for a second. Some of these kids barely know how to tie their shoe. So, and actually at the time the Common Core was passed, there was actually a letter signed by 500 child development specialists condemning the Common Core because they said they were not age appropriate. And in fact, you read through the work teams, they did not include a single child development specialist. None. And we see that. You look at kids in New York. I have a couple social worker friends in New York who say, hey, Common Core is giving us great business. Because kids are stressed out, kids are crying, teachers are frustrated. These are not right for our kids. And last point, I know Brian's looking like Shane, you need to end, sorry. Are you about done? Common Core is costly. A year-old study done by the Pioneer Institute shows that an estimated cost of states, all states, this is pre-states repealing Common Core, by the way, is $16 billion. We still don't know how many schools are equipped to meet the technology requirements for the Common Core standards assessments because those are going to be online. We have rural school districts in Iowa that don't even have broadband access yet. And right now, if Iowa chooses Smarter Bounce, and they still may, even though we're kind of withdrawing from the consortia itself, two numbers I want to give you, and these are two numbers I talk to legislators about. Iowa assessments right now cost $3.50 per student per assessment. If we choose Smarter Bounce as a state, Smarter Bounce will cost $27.30 per student per assessment. We simply can't afford that. Eric mentioned over half, actually it's about 60% of our state budget is spent on education. Can we really afford to jack up assessment costs that much? I don't believe so. So, what to do? First of all, educate yourself. Tell your family and friends. Ask to see your kids' curriculum. You as a parent have the right, or encourage, if you're a grandparent, encourage your kids to make sure they're asking to see their kids' curriculum. Parents need to know what their kids are reading and what they're learning. Whether they're in public school or whether they're in private school, they need to know. Parents need to be involved. Write letters to the editor, distribute flyers and informational material. Contact your state representative and state senator about this issue consistently. The squeaky wheel really does get the grease. So if they hear from you regularly, if they hear from a lot of their constituents regularly, it's going to start popping up in the forefront of their mind. Contact Governor Branstad's office. I have kudos to Senator Chuck Grassley. He's led the charge in the Senate to try to defund Common Core at the federal level. We need to encourage our state representatives, our U.S. representatives, as well as the other U.S. senator, whoever that might end up being, whether it's Braley or Ernst, we'll find out in November, to defund Common Core at the federal level and prevent the U.S. Department of Education from implementing these carrot and stick approaches and trying to sway education policy at the state level through this approach. And then also sign up for more info at iowarestored.com. So check that out. We talk about education policy at the state level, me and a couple other people. And also bookmark truthinamericaneducation.com, where I write about Common Core frequently, and we're looking at it from kind of the 30,000 foot levels, and we write a lot about what different states are doing and news you can catch up on, see what's going on across the country. Thank you so much for your time.